I just want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Chris Wharton. I'm an associate professor of nutrition and director of the Food Systems Transformation Initiative. We'll have a small slew of introductions here in a moment. What I'd like to do is invite Vice President Jacob Moore to step up and introduce the meeting generally.
Say hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Jacob Moore. My name is Jacob Moore. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Tribal Relations for Arizona State University. And I'm honored to be here at the invitation of Dr. Brayboy. And I know we've been looking forward to this day, to this event, for the collaboration, the potential collaborations. We've been growing programs and services and the students here at ASU, much at to the credit of President Crow, who, again, by way of charter, states that we measure our own success not by who we exclude, but who we include in their own success. So that really is our marching orders. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself or the university. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that later. But my role this morning is to introduce Ricardo Leonard. Ricardo is a council member from the Salt River Pima Maricopa Committee, which is really about 5-10 minutes down the road, just adjacent to ASU's campus. And in order to start this event out in the right way, in a proper way, for us, Councilman Leonard to come up and do a blessing to start this event.
When I speak before people, I'm usually told to talk about Casino Arizona and Tempe State Resort, but I'm going to go ahead and drop all that. This morning I wanted to sing a prayer song for you throughout your day here, and all the days up into your life, and these are for your relatives that are at home right now too, that are going through their paces of maybe school and or maybe some are home ill. But this is a blessing song for all of them and all of you and all the people that you know. And it's called Dot Them. And the story is about when we become spirits and we move into that spirit world. When we reach that point to where we receive wings, at the top of those wings are bright shining lights. And when those wings come upon us and we take that first flap, that light hits from the sun and shines over everyone and blesses them. So this is a song called Talk Awesome.
Toki on nama yo nama ina ve sikanya
Thank you so much. So, what we have today is a multiple-hour workshop. And so this is a collaboration amongst numerous entities, the Food Systems Transformation Initiative, Center for Indian Education, led by Brian Brayboy, who's here today, and the Journal of Agriculture, Food Systems, and Community Development, represented by Duncan Hilchey and Amy Christian, who are also here, and thank you so much for being here. So the groups of us were discussing indigenous food systems, and we're interested in exploring this in foundational ways, exploring concepts that might offer opportunities for discussions, collaborations, these sorts of opportunities, but then also some end products out of this specific meeting will be the opportunity to create special issues, both for this journal as well as a journal associated with the Center for Indian Education. So what's going to happen today is basically a short series of activities. We'll start out with a short panel discussion with a few of the folks here, and hopefully these will generate ideas to sort of germinate the discussions to follow. We'll follow that with a 45-minute to an hour discussion where we can have open discussion about the ideas that are that come out of that initial panel discussion. And that might be stories about what's already happening in the community. That might be areas of possible collaboration. This can be generally directed by the entire group. We'll break thereafter for lunch. We've got a delicious lunch coming, and then thereafter we'll actually take all the ideas from the first part of this workshop and then move them into crafting them, honing them for special issues for 2 different journals, for opportunities for folks here, for students of faculty here, for community members that would like to be writing about things going on related to indigenous food systems. These are going to be opportunities for possible outlets for those sorts of things. Does that sound like a good plan? All right. What I'd like to do is bring up our panel members. Mila, come on up, who was just told she was going to be joining the panel. She's very graciously agreed to join the panel and pinch hit for somebody who couldn't be here today. Brian will be moderating. We've got someone else joining us by Skype, and what I'd like to do is have each of you introduce yourselves, and then we'll lead off with a couple of questions. And I think, Brian, we can have this panel discussion. It'll be a little bit of a discussion amongst the people here, but then open it up to the group as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And just so you all know, Professor Liz Hoover, who's on the screen now, and she'll introduce herself, has a hard stop in about 10 minutes. So one of the things we'll probably do is, and we're trying to add Janie Hibb from University of Arkansas, but I'm probably going to just, in some ways, ask Liz to talk a little bit about her work and how she thinks about native food systems, and then Mila and Janie we can have a discussion about some of those broader issues, because Liz is joining us and she's got to run off to teach a class. So if you can unmute that, Sydney, that would be great. And now she's frozen. Liz, are you there?
Yeah, is that the verbal noise or and?
Well, you've gone frozen on us. I love technology.
Yeah, I'm
Okay, there it is. And we've got Janie joining us too. Hi, Janie. So thanks for connecting with us. Janie, we're going to have Liz just sort of talk for a little bit before she runs off to class, and then we'll have a conversation with you and Professor Milo Vicente Garfield. So Liz, will you talk to us a little bit about how you think about native food systems and also larger questions of food sovereignty? Could you hear me?
the wind bubble, and then there's crazy underwater noise. Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit and assume it's all coming through, even though now I can't see you guys. So hi, my name is Elizabeth Hoover. I'm an assistant professor of American Studies and Ethnic Studies here at Brown University, where we're also building a Native American Indigenous Studies initiative, as well as eventually a food studies program. So those things are all currently in the work here. But my work started looking at Indigenous communities and environmental contamination and environmental health issues. So Brian said I should plug this book, just came out. I just got it in the mail today. The River is in Us, Fighting Toxics in a Mohawk Community. And so working off of that project and having worked for many years with people in Akwesasne on projects geared toward getting people back into eating local food, back into gardening, seed saving, those kind of things. I started the Garden Warriors Good Seeds project, and so that's the blog. You just type in Garden Warriors Good Seeds, that will take you to the website. And as part of that project, I had been attending conferences for years, getting to know people in different Indigenous communities, working on community-based farming and gardening projects as part of trying to help the organization that I have been affiliated with for a long time, called Ganahio Yungai. We are planting good seeds. It's a Mohawk farming and gardening group. And so as part of learning more about these other projects, I got some funding in 2014 and jumped in the car and drove 20,000 miles around the country for about 3.5 months and went and visited 40 different communities and conducted interviews with folks, took photos and video. And as part of that, created a blog post about each of those communities. So that's on the Garden Warriors Good Seeds blog that I mentioned. And I've been continuing some of that work even as I've come back to Brown as the professor here. I'm working on a new book project around those interviews. I have a chapter coming out in the Smithsonian Handbook of the North American Indian on food sovereignty. And then we have a special issue of the American Indian Culture and Research Journal that focuses on North American food sovereignty. And then an edited volume that I'm working on with Devon Mahislo at Kansas, again about food sovereignty issues. So I think there's a lot of work that's coming together. I know Priscilla Setti, I think she's in Saskatchewan, is also putting together a special issue. So I think this is an issue that people are becoming more and more interested in, specifically Indigenous food sovereignty. You know, previously, from the late 90s onward, written about you helping people who have access to healthy, culturally appropriate food, you know, thinking about how do you make more land accessible to quote-unquote peasant groups as a way of producing more food. And then building off of that, I think there's been a real growing Indigenous food sovereignty movement saying, okay, there's something to be gained from this activism around food sovereignty, but rather than saying people want land, people want very specific land. They want their Indigenous homeland, access to that. There's a focus on treaty rights that you don't see as much with one of the broader global food sovereignty movement, I think. And a real focus on food outside of farming. I think the traditional food sovereignty movement has really focused on agriculture, and a lot of Indigenous communities are saying, well, to some extent growing vegetables is helpful, but how can we have access to traditional food systems that include wild racing and gathering and fishing and hunting and those kind of things, and the framing it through issues of relationality, just a different cultural connection to food communities, and communities including plants and animals and birds and seeds and those kind of entities. So, yeah, I'm happy to talk about, one of the things where the NASA panel applications are due tonight at midnight, so we're putting together one looking at seed sovereignty specifically, which has been sort of this subset of food sovereignty, the way that for communities for whom farming and gardening has been historically and culturally and spiritually an important activity, of the efforts put into in some cases reclaiming heritage seeds, so rematriation, as Rowan White, who's a Mohawk seed keeper, calls it, and the rematriating of these seeds, bringing them home from institutions, from seed banks, from entities who collected these seeds at some point, kind of alienating them from the Indigenous community and bringing them back home to those communities to be grown out and reincorporated into gardens. So the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network has been working very hard to make connections between institutions who hold seeds and the communities from whom those seeds were originally collected, to welcome them back home to their families, as well as developing curricular materials around how do you educate people about the science of seed saving, about planting things so that species aren't crossing, about storing your seeds, that kind of thing. So I think that's been an important push, and an important aspect of this food sovereignty movement has been this push toward seed sovereignty. So bringing those seeds home, protecting them, making sure that your heritage corn is not being contaminated with pollen from genetically engineered corn, making sure that multinational corporations aren't able to patent people's seeds, aren't able to take those seeds and tinker with them, genetically engineer, removing characteristics of putting in new ones. So that's been another push behind this Indigenous food sovereignty movement.
Great. Thank you,
So
Liz.
is there any questions? Is there anything in particular you'd like me to touch on? Or
No, can you hear?
one before I have to run off to class, but
Can you hear me now?
yes.
So I just want to open this up to the audience really quickly and see if you all have questions or comments for Dr. Hoover before she runs to class. Yeah, we've got one question for you, Liz.
Okay.
In your travels around North America, did you encounter tribal communities, reservations, otherwise, who were having difficulty engaging in food sovereignty projects because of the dominant culture over many, many decades had changed attitudes, foodways, and traditions that disappeared, such that there's some resistance to even changing and going back, what might be considered going backward in some cases?
Did you hear that question?
I only got snippets of it. There's a wind tunnel happening over there.
Let me see if I can, I'm going to try to paraphrase. I think the question is, in your travels across the country, did you hear about, did you encounter any tribal communities that were struggling to engage in food sovereignty because of the pressures of outside communities that have sort of led to people not even wanting to engage in this process of rematriation? Is that a fair summation of the question?
Not necessarily didn't want to engage in food sovereignty because of outside pressures. I mean, people have felt pressured to plant conventional crops, to grow in such a way that is helpful in this economic system that we are all part of here. And so you do have conventional farmers who are Indigenous people farming on reservations. You have people kind of with conventional ag operations, growing operations. And then I think you have almost a different subset of people who are focused on heritage crops, heritage seeds, that sort of thing. And then there are other folks, like the Nisqually in the Pacific Northwest, who said, we were not farming folks, we were not gardening folks, but this has been a helpful model for us. There they have a vocational rehab program that grows vegetables and provides employment for people who are out of rehab, who don't have robust resumes, who can use this opportunity to be in a healing space and grow vegetables that are then given to elders and youth and help to make the community more food secure in that way. So they recognize that there's a difference between that and the tribal fishing operations and other operations that are more geared toward traditional foods, but they embrace that anyway. And so I think some of the main challenges around becoming more food sovereign have not been so much of resistance to going after these kinds of projects because of outside forces, but more, and Jamie, I'm sure, can speak to this, issues around resources, around operating, around federal policies, around how do you get the funds to get projects like these off the ground. Some people have always had a connection with their seeds, and some people have put a lot of work into tracking down and seeking out sources of those seeds, and so that's been different in each places. But I haven't heard, so I don't know if you're referring to, in the case of repatriating grave goods, there's been communities that are like, no, thank you, like, that's on you. You pissed off those ancestors by digging them up and putting them in your museum. Like, we're not interested in bringing home that kind of energy. I haven't heard that type of narrative around seeds that has come up around repatriating ancestors and grave goods, if that makes sense.
Do you have time for one more question, Liz?
It's real quick.
Okay, I was just wondering about the issue of the GMO salmon and how the tribes in the Pacific Northwest has there been a kind of collective response to the FDA's approval of that, or what sort of response has been marshaled against that?
At sites where these GMO salmon are, part of the concern is what happens if and when those salmon escape and then are commingling with the natural salmon. So it's similar to the resistance that people had around genetically modifying rice out at Warrior. What happens when those seeds, that pollen escapes and it then contaminates the traditional food system. If you have treaties with a species or a plant or animal community, you have an understanding, you have obligations to each other. I think there's some concern about what does that then mean if you fundamentally alter that other community or members of that community. How do you then relate to those type altered beings, altered creatures, as well as concerns around do we fully know all of the health implications for these animals, for the animals that are eating those, for the people who are eating those. So I think there's a lot of suspicion and concern for communities in that way. And with that, I'm sorry to have to leave you all, but I have to get myself across campus. I have 90 students waiting for me for the Intro to Ethnic Studies lecture. So
thank you.
best of luck.
Thanks.
For your workshop, I
Thanks,
have to
Liz.
dash out. So
Okay.
but thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, so just so you all know, Chris and I are working at trying to bring Liz and and Janie to campus at some point in the spring. We were hoping to have them here now. It just didn't work out for their schedule. So we've got Janie Hip and Mila Vicente Carpio, both faculty members. Because Mila is pinch hitting, I want to give her a chance to kind of collect her thoughts. And Janie, I wonder if you might just sort of talk to us a little bit about your work, what you're up to at the University of Arkansas, and how you think about native food systems, and then I'll ask again about food sovereignty in a moment. But I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, what your work is, and how you think about native food systems.
So Brian, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
And I'm assuming everyone else in the room will give me a high sign. So, great. Yay. I wish I could be there with you all today. And it's a pleasure to be involved with you today, even remotely. And Brian, thanks for the invite. And yes, I will come out there. And I first have to lead off by saying that everything that Liz said was amen. I mean, I would not add. I mean, she and I together, and as well as others, could literally fill your head with days upon days upon days about the topic at hand. So it's kind of difficult to narrow it down just to a few comments. But I'll start just by letting you know I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. I am a food and agriculture law attorney. I'm an attorney with an LLM in that specialty area, and I actually have been doing this work for about 35 years. I started in Oklahoma back in the early days of my legal career, and have been at the University of Arkansas since 1992, focusing on the intersection between food and agriculture legal issues, law and policy, and Indian law issues. I will tell you, just straight up, I have never, in 35 years of doing this work, I've never seen what we're seeing now. And what I mean by that is a combination of almost a sense of urgency and fervor at every tribal level. And I just came from, about 2 weeks ago, the National Congress of American Indians, and we literally had 4 or 5 different sessions, and they were packed to the max with tribal government leadership, their staff. This has gone well beyond community engagement and grassroots actions, if you will, which are essential and must continue regardless. But it is literally permeated throughout Indian country and to all of our structures. We even are sitting down and talking with the gaming industry to literally figure out what their role is in this entire arena. So I'll just kind of lay that out as a first observation. But I took leave of my senses in 2007 and decided that any good agricultural lawyer needed to actually crawl into the belly of the beast. And I went up to DC to serve as a national program leader at USDA on some very technical issues that literally formed the early part of my career, which is farm financial management and risk management, assessment, trade adjustment, on an entire portfolio that literally sits around economic development in food and agriculture, and even sprinkling in some international issues. But I then switched over in the Obama administration and served as Secretary Vilsack's senior advisor for tribal relations. So I literally sat across, myself, my staff, and my office sat across all of USDA, which is an extremely large agency with multiple sub-agencies. And my interface was the entirety of Indian country, which included federally recognized tribes, but also state recognized tribes, community organizations, etc. I served in that capacity in the first Obama term and then came back to the University of Arkansas. Many of you in the room may know Stacey Leeds. She is the dean of our law school. And we stood up the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative here within the law school. We literally sit side by side with the LLM specialization program in food and agriculture law within the law school. And we've been doing this work since since 2013. I've been on this campus since '93. But we grew from a staff of 2 to a staff of 15 in 4 years, which that can give you some indication of the need. But our focus areas here at the initiative are in 3, pretty broad areas. One is improving tribal governance around food and agriculture. As an ag lawyer, I can tell you that ag law, it has always been extremely regulated. It is regulated at the international law arena as well as domestic federal law, state law, and about 15 years ago or so, local jurisdictions around the country started getting into the regulation and policy arena around food and agriculture systems. Tribal governments, for the most part, have been absent in that equation. One of our biggest projects that we're going to be rolling out the final product early next year is the development of a model food and agriculture code capable of being used by tribes with whatever tweaks and modifications they choose. We felt as agricultural lawyers here in our initiative that some effort needed to be undertaken to actually try to craft a baseline of policy infrastructure that tribes could literally access for free and decide whether or not for themselves the scope and breadth that they might want to adopt for their own policy infrastructure. I realize that is not a grassroots up effort, but in my opinion, with 35 years of experience, it would be great if we had the time to actually have a full grassroots policy infrastructure rise up. I don't believe we do. And I'm glad to go into further detail about that. But that's going to roll out next year. We've had a team of probably 10 lawyers working on that, literally for the last 2.5 years, approaching 3 years. We also work directly with tribal farmers and ranchers, food people, community groups that are doing food sovereignty assessments or getting started in gardening or trying to scale up. There's actually a lot of activity right now across most tribes in scaling up beyond just a small community garden. These things are literally emerging very quickly into larger feeding systems that can literally have the capacity to meet the food access needs of entire tribes, entire communities. And we also work a lot on some very complicated regulatory training and proficiency development. We've got a lot of catching up to do in that regard, and I'm happy to go into gory detail with you about that. But one of the areas that we have to have more folks who actually have the certification and training in is food safety. Because the minute our foods leave our communities, they are captured within a broader food safety regime. And right now we literally are exposing ourselves to unnecessary risk from a legal standpoint by not having our own inspection and food safety infrastructures. There are tribes that have already gone into that space that are fully food safety verified because they're in a commercial infrastructure of food systems. But, back to one of the comments that Liz made, I just have to, and then I'm going to open it up, I just have to say right up that one of the things that guides me is that it's really not up to me as a Chickasaw woman to determine what any tribes, communities, actions are in these spaces. I believe our work here is to be of service to all tribes and to all Indian people in this very complicated arena of food systems. But it is not up to us to decide where people go with this. And I think that has to be kind of the hallmark of how we conduct ourselves at our initiative. But if we can assist tribes, if they're ready and they want to be in commercial settings, then carry on. But they need to be supported so that they can achieve some level of success. If they never want to leave the foods and take them outside their communities, that is their call. It's not our call. And so if you believe in self-governance and self-determination and sovereignty, then you have to believe that I believe that you have to believe that each tribe has to determine this for themselves. And right now, we're all over the map. We, meaning all of Indian country. We've got a little bit of everything going on, all the way up to and including export of foods to other countries. So it's a pretty rich picture if you actually dig deeper and realize what is out there. But it isn't just all about seeds. It's not all about community gardens. It's way bigger and way more pervasive than a lot of people even recognize. But the other piece of the puzzle that I would leave you with is the urgency. We have some very horrific health situations that most of our people are in. And we have to correct those, and the best way I know to do that is through improving food, improving our access to food and improving our access to healthy food. We have a lot of folks who are very, very vulnerable right now, and we're also in a political environment that really requires us to act. And so I'll leave you with that, and if you have any questions, I'm totally available, Brian, to respond to those.
Thank you. Jane, if you're just sort of, we're gonna take your comments and, would you mind muting your, okay. We're gonna take your comments. We're gonna have Professor Vicente Carpio present for a little bit, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience as well. Okay. Thanks. That was really lovely. Thanks.
Thank you. Donjo, I'm Milo Vicente Carpio. I'm Hickory, Apache, Laguna, and Isleta. I'm from New Mexico, a visitor on O'odham land. And yeah, I'm just jumping in here. I think I'm taking some of the questions that Brian had talked about, and looking at how do you look at native food systems, and looking at how I sort of look at food sovereignty, and one of the things is that I come to sort of this table late, and I've been here. I mean that by I come from a family who on my grandma's side, they had orchards, they were farmers. So in that sense, and also on the Apache side, we have a shorter season, so there's different things that we grew, but we're more active in terms of hunting. So I come at it from these two different points. And so in that sense, I'm looking at it from traditional, sort of looking at it from traditional standpoints. I also, I teach a class called Actualizing Decolonization, and through that class, the students create projects, decolonizing projects, defining decolonization the way they see it, and in doing that, some years back, I had a few students who started really looking at food sovereignty, looking at gardening foods, all of those things, and we made an agreement that what we would do is they would create a student group and I would create the class. And so what we've done is I've created a class in which it's teaching American Indians of food justice and food sovereignty, and there's a student group. It's not as strong as it's not going right now. We're talking about who's going to pick that back up. But we were looking at the student group, and they were doing gardening. And over here by the social science building, they had garden areas, and they were actually gardening. They created a garden, so they were gardening, and we were doing all of this together. So in some ways, that's how I come to it academic. I'm saying I'm coming to it late is because I'm coming to it late academically. The other thing, so one of the things in looking at it, so when I come to this, looking at how do I look at native food systems, I'm trying to look at it initially from the traditional standpoint. What are the ways in which we grew foods, collected the seeds, and gathering? I think that's one of the things that is not always addressed, because gardening is easy. You go to that, and we didn't always have that. We had a lot of foods outside areas, and with climate change, we're beginning to see. We were talking about acorns. Me and a family member were talking about acorns and about eating them, and we were kind of laughing because this year there was less piñons. It's an off season for piñons, but there was no chokecherries. We didn't have any chokecherries this year, and so we usually gather those. So we were joking that acorns are probably the only thing we've got right now that we're eating, so we're competing with the bears. Which actually brings up a whole other aspect, is our relationship with communities. The other thing, I'm working on a book with Walt Lara and Kishan Lara Cooper on the salmon wars on the Klamath River with the Yurok. And one of the things where we began, or where Walt begins, is that point on who the salmon are and what they mean to the Yurok. And so it's, for me, the starting point is always from that traditional standpoint. So, but what the other part is, what I'm seeing is in terms of seed saving and food sovereignty, is it involves so many different areas that it begins to light fires in different areas. It lights fires under understanding water rights. It lights fires in understanding and fighting for environmental issues and looking at it in a different way. It also is the strength of bringing back culture. I mean, I go hunting, and one of the things that when we're doing that, my family, we talk about what different things mean, and even in that, going year after year, you can see how the environment is changing. How we were just talking about how it's not as cold as it should be at this point. So that's sort of where I come into this quickly.
Excellent, thank you. So this is great, because what we've got is really a really interesting and broad level conversation here. Janie, I don't know if you can re-engage your video, but Janie's got this really great way of thinking about her work at the USDA. I'm going to ask her at some point to, she's still on, I think she is, to talk a little bit about what they're doing in terms of a summer camp at Arkansas, and then, you know, Mila's approach in terms of thinking about this from a very traditional point of view, I think gives us the gamut of it. And I think both you and Liz and Janie have talked about the urgency of what's in front of us. So yeah, I hope she's still on. Let's open it up to questions, and we'll see. I'll send her another note and see if she's, there she is.
Sorry.
No problem.
I had to take care of some business.
Thank you. So there's a question.
Sorry.
Thanks. There's a question in the back.
Yeah, Janie, thanks for joining us. And I have a question about the policy side. So in my work, I've worked a lot with small-scale farmers in and around the Phoenix Valley, and a concern and issue that disallows them from, if they want to better establish operations, grow their operations, move from a small-scale CSA and farmers market type of work into distribution to larger institutions, food safety becomes a real problem, at least perceived to be so. So what I've heard from qualitative work I've done is that it is onerous in terms of labor, but GIF-GAP certification in particular, onerous in terms of the labor involved and potentially too expensive. What's been your experience with that type of certification, especially on a smaller scale, with Indigenous communities?
Yeah, you wouldn't know I get the hardest question first. So here's what I'll tell you. In food safety, you have to be so specific. Let me just give you an example. You may have a small-scale producer whose market is a CSA, and they actually, can you hear me okay, Brian?
Yes. Sorry,
Okay.
there was a mouse that was just bugging me, so I had to distract you.
Okay, sorry. So you may have a small-scale producer whose market is literally to the consumer through CSA. You may actually have them, they may actually qualify for an exemption under FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, for instance. And their consumers, their customers may not actually require them to have any certification at all around food safety. The question that I think you always have to ask the folks that you're working with is, where do you really take your food? Because and I say this, and I say this with tongue in cheek, because I've spent 35 years of my life working with farmers, usually on the small to mid-sized scale level. And quite often they will engage in the CSA, but then they'll have surplus food, right? And they'll have stuff that maybe was just too much to hand off to their CSA customers, and they might take it down to the local grocery store. When they do that, then they are in a whole nother environment, regulatory-wise. And what happened when the Food Safety Modernization Act was passed, is probably the most fundamental reconfiguration of produce regulatory laws in probably 40 years. I actually 20 years ago wrote a piece and did an analysis of all food safety laws for one of my employers at that time, and it was a mess back then. And so the attempt by Congress in 2010 was to unravel some of the mess, but I think it's probably gotten worse. But Congress did try to clarify. The problem is that these things around food safety certification requirements are multi-layered and extremely varied, and they tend to be driven by where it is you're taking that food. So if, for instance, you are working with tribal producers who are on reservation and the food never leaves the reservation, it never leaves the jurisdiction of the tribe itself, regardless of whether it's CSA or going into some other venue, then you may literally have a set of producers who would be exempt under existing federal law. But the minute that food crosses over into the boundaries of another jurisdiction, then you're talking a whole different breed of cat. You better know exactly what the state and local laws are with regard to food safety, because you could be walking them into a space that is quite complicated and that they're not prepared for. So that is why when I talk to tribal producers of any kind, I just ask them to set this idea aside for a minute, that somehow they're tribal and exempt, which is a pure fiction, and actually have them put the hat on of where that food is going. There is a move afoot, for example, to actually have food grown on reservations, but then have it go into the schools and be eligible for federal reimbursement. Well, the minute you do that, the food that enters the schools has to have some sort of food safety, cloak, if you will, that sits around it. And the question then becomes, does the tribe itself, as a government, have its own food safety laws in place that would literally form a protective shield around the producers? So I guess what I'm saying, and then there's GAP, and then there's generally accepted manufacturing practices. It all depends on, my tribe, for instance, has a chocolate factory. We do beverage chocolates, and we are GFSA certified, which is the global level standard of food safety certification, which means that we are ISO certified. But what that does is it opens up our markets for our chocolates throughout the entire world. So whenever you're in the food safety space, that is literally, I think, one of the most complicated areas that we're going to be needing as much bandwidth, if you will, in Indian country as possible. Sorry, I know it's a lengthy explanation, but it's a hard question. I hope that helped.
Thank you. Other questions, please?
So, this is not necessarily regulatory, but maybe a question of, and maybe this is my love, how we sort of transform the system, starting, and since we're, partnering here with education, how we get kids and schools to transform those systems. I mean, part of the issue, and this is sort of globally in our society, is that, we've been sold certain food, and that food has been, really engineered, to, affect our brains in certain ways. And kids are as susceptible as any of us, maybe more so, to wanting those foods. And so how do we educate, Native kids in the schools and to, kind of want these foods and how do we really start to transfer that system from the ground up?
Great question. Janie, let me ask, I'm gonna ask Mila to answer first, and then I'm hoping you might talk a little bit about what y'all are doing in the summers, as a bit of a response, but obviously you can do whatever you want, but I think it's important for folks to kind of hear what you all are doing at Arkansas as well, so.
I think one of the things is looking at, foods are, that's one of the first systems that was disrupted with colonization. When you look at in terms of, even movement, removal, the destruction, the scorched earth policy, to destroy the food so to create dependency, those kinds of things. And I think one of the things you have to do is look at it, not just with the kids in the school, but the whole community. It's, because you have families who may not be utilizing those foods also. So it's the parents, it's and in some cases, your grandparents, parents, and then into with the children. And I think it also goes the other way around too, in that if you're teaching the children about these foods, they turn around and start asking for these foods. So you're looking at it in two different, have to look at it in both directions, not just one direction. And I think one of the things, I know in my community, one thing they're doing, especially with the language classes, is they're going out and they're talking about the seasons and stuff, and what foods, and talking about them in the language, what foods, and going out and gathering them. So they're, and it's wild onions, carrots, those kinds of things, and then also, and I know White Mountain is sort of bringing all of that together, the gathering, and then the cooking aspect of it. So I think in that sense, it's not just one, let's create a project for this. I think it's an all-around sort of aspect. I don't know if I'm answering it.
No, that's good. Right.
Thank you. Janie?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
I'm gonna just share with you as quickly as I can what we're doing here in the summers. About 4 years ago, we decided that if we were going to be serious about these issues, then we needed to grab a hold of the next generation of who were going to be our food people. And I don't mean that in a grab a hold and indoctrinate sort of way, but through my personal experience, I had come to realize that just as you all were just then talking about activities that are happening with the smaller children, the younger age groups, that has to happen. That can be bound up in language and culture and all sorts of traditional teachings around food. That is such a deep potential to literally turn the corner on eating habits, as well as nutrition and health and all of those things. Just by the nature of our work, we decided to launch basically a summit activity on our campus, and it was a gargantuan undertaking from the beginning, and we knew it, but we had no idea what the response was going to be. But we launched a Native Youth in Food and Agriculture Summer Leadership Summit. We call it the Summit. The first year we had 37 students from 21 tribes. This last July, we had 150 students from 76 tribes. So that tells you how rapidly this summit is growing. And in the meantime, the Intertribal Ag Council has started standing up long weekend regional mini summits. And we use basically the same curriculum, but, and I'll discuss that in just a second. But the regional mini summits really allow land-based and resource-based, getting your hands in the soil and the water, and really have a different feel than what we do when we bring students on campus in the summer. We cover all costs, all travel, all food, all residence hall, etc. It's not cheap, but they are a strong investment in our future. We allow students to be as young as 14, and we have a college level age that are literally student leaders who work with each small group. But we felt from the beginning, or at least I felt from the beginning, that we literally have no time to waste here. And when the students come here, they have to apply, they have to do an essay as to why they have a passion in food and agriculture. And some of them are already involved in agriculture, you know, but some of them are already leading their community food sovereignty assessments. Some of them are already involved in their family's farming and ranching that feeds their community. I mean, they're all over the map. We even have students who are from villages in Alaska as well as Native Hawaiian students. So they come from a wide variety. I had a parent call me the first year and say, "Are you going to teach our children how to produce food?" And I said, "No, that's your job. Arkansas is not the same as Alaska. It would be totally inappropriate." But what we do provide an exposure to them about is land tenure issues, land policy, water issues, water law, business planning, financial management, all of these issues that go into sustaining a food system, regardless of whether you're only growing traditional food products or whether you literally are in a commercial export marketplace. And what we tell the students is not up to us to determine that path. That is your path. But we very strongly believe that the sooner we can get some of these more complicated concepts in front of the students, then the better off we'll be. And back to the food safety question, we actually did a kind of a mini rundown of the food safety grower trainings that we are doing right now all over the country. Those are day-long, intense 8-hour trainings with a certificate at the end. And we put the students this last summer through a shortened version of that, and their comments were, "Well, this is not any big deal." So, you know, I think we so underestimate our high school and entering high school age group students of their capacities to grasp these concepts. And we even have them talk through estate planning and land acquisition, all of these kind of very gnarly issues of interface and resource access. So I can go on and on and on about that forever and ever, because those students and young leaders are just amazing. You should be in the room with them. They're doing incredible things when they go back home, but I'm firmly committed to our continued involvement in that, but we're already seeing that we need to, in the future years, we need to actually continue to modify and shift so that we can get even more advanced concepts in front of them.
Thank you.
Can I add to that? I
Please.
think one of the things, and in listening, it's with the summit, one of the things that I've really seen is that when the kids are involved in the food, when the kids are involved in the gardening, when they see what this is, it changes their attitude about the food. It changes the attitude on where their food comes from and what it means to not waste it, to eat it, to say, oh, this is, because part of it is, you know, trying to get kids to eat different things. You know, even my grandkids, they come to the house and they see the tomatoes they go and pick tomatoes and eat them, and they won't eat tomatoes elsewhere, but they'll sit there and they say, oh, look at, you got it in your garden, and they'll start eating it. So I think that starts, at a basic level, starts changing the attitudes of what is food and what does that actually mean.
And I just want to say, I've heard Janie say that she's looking for partners in these summits, so I want to just put on the table that ASU, we should consider becoming a partner in her work as it continues to grow. Janie, you can kick me under the table if I've misremembered that.
No, we need partners because I think we're seeing what is the beginning of a huge groundswell of getting our younger people involved in these issues. And I jokingly tell people, you know, if you make me try to convince a 60-year-old Native woman that she needs to do records in a certain way to build her food business, and I can't make her change. Because I'm one of those. But if I actually can get in the head of a young person, it's just like your previous speaker said, it shifts their thinking and they believe that there are no boundaries here to food sovereignty, that this is totally within their reach and their power. And it is so exciting. And come on. Come on.
Thank you. Rim Jim had a question and then we'll go here.
So I'm not quite sure if this question is appropriate for this meeting, but I'm inspired to ask it, and I would be leaving a little sooner, so I apologize for that. But I come from India, and as I've been hearing about these conversations, when we talk about so there was this discussion about the food going out of the reservation, and then the moment we talk about that, we move from the local directly to the global, but I think there might be possibilities of connecting with other indigenous communities around the world. My father was a scientist in plant genetics, and he used to be very passionate about talking about these stories about how seeds got, from one region of the world to another. And he used to tell stories like the pepper that we enjoy so much in our food, the spice and so much of it I had come to know came from Latin America and North America. And that I think is, I felt so much connected to hear about it, that things that I considered traditional are actually coming from other places. And I was wondering if there could be, I don't know if this is part of the scope of this forum, but connecting with other indigenous communities that are also struggling with similar issues. Food sovereignty is a major issue in indigenous communities all over the world. And I think there could be some interesting lessons. So when you were talking about partners, I thought I would just bring this issue up, but I don't know if this is within the scope.
Right. Janie and Miley, you want to respond to that? And Chris, I'm putting you on notice. I'm going to ask you to respond to this too. So, Janie, do you want to respond to this question?
Yeah, I'll tell you that you're thinking along the same lines that I've been thinking for about 20 years. The question is, how do we do it? You know, it's one thing to talk about those connections. It's another thing to bring them into reality. And, you know, I think there's so many layers to that conversation and to actually making that happen or setting a table for that to happen. But it is totally doable. It's just, and I think we actually do have some mechanisms in policy and law that would allow it to happen in an easier way than we think. We just need the right people at the table in terms of actually being committed to getting it done. But it is, I would love to see that happen, absolutely. Because there is some, and when you were asking the question, I was also thinking, you know, we don't know each other's stories and what is happening within each other's tribes as well as we need to either, here within, you know, the lower 48, if you will. And so we've got some homework to do here at home, but that shouldn't hold us back from connecting throughout the hemisphere and beyond.
I'm gonna make a date between the two of you all in February, so we'll connect that. Do you wanna, respond to this?
I think in that sense, it's, when we look at our communities, there's a tendency to see the barriers of the reservation. When we didn't have those barriers before, we exchanged foods long time ago. We've always been exchanging foods, and I think there's certain forums, certain places where those kinds of ideas and even foods are kind of taking place. Different conferences and stuff like that. The sharing of food. I know Chris has participated in different conferences and has done different food sovereignty, gardening and food production, but also I have students that are former students at our ITCA who are working with 13 different tribes, and there's a place, they're working on a CDC grant on health and wellness, but they're actually being able to bring some of these, there's different places where they can bring some of these tribes together and have them have a conversation. And I think it also depends, I mean, I look from the ground up, but I think it's, and I'll say leadership, making that a priority becomes, that's where, I know leadership has, a million other things, but if they can create the space for some of that, that's where some of that can take place.
Chris, what do you have a sense of your vision of Rim Jim's question in response to this?
Yeah, so I'm a very practically oriented guy, and what I hear out of this is an opportunity to create something like toolkits that aren't just about, how do you, and I'm thinking more like a small scale ag perspective, that's sort of my lens, but how do you grow efficiently? How can you have a livelihood in the food system by actually running a farming operation? How do you efficiently deal with the regulatory barriers and market barriers that exist for small scale farms? So FSCI, the Food Systems Transformation Initiative, a couple years ago, we ran a workshop in Senegal that was focused on youth engagement in agriculture and technological innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think that there are a number of solutions that would better engage youth in particular in ag. And so it's things like taking traditional farming operations and marrying that to tech innovations like, software that makes it easier to engage with CSA participants, or better planning schedules and those sorts of things. That stuff exists. Working with food safety regulations, for example, a lot of the ways small scale farms do it when they do get food safety certified is really old school and onerous because they're doing paper type records. Innovating an app that would easily collect that stuff remotely would be a way to kind of solve that problem, reduce the burden and the cost. You could conceive of a set of tools that are innovations on the farm, innovations in relation to regulations, and bring that together to make the entry point into farming operations having a financially viable livelihood in food systems a little bit easier. So I could see partnering in this way to try to conceive of what that could look like, and then making that available and trying to promote that. And then working with, here in the States, like ag extension type operations who do food safety training, who know farming operations, and then connecting with tribal communities that have, some successful examples of things like this. So you get the case studies, put that all together, and now you have something of a roadmap for people to try. So that'd be my response.
Great. I think that's great, and so we should figure out if we can get the folks from Arkansas together with the Senegalese and the folks in India, and we'll really sort of maybe jump from there. There's a question here, and then the councilman, and then Duncan, you're in the hole.
I had a question that relates to education. Once again, if taking it one step further, the youth of the native peoples that are being trained, that are learning about their own indigenous traditions, if they then can become educators in other schools, for other youth, offering an alternative model, offering a different way of producing and consuming food.
Anyone want to comment on that?
No, just
Is
that
that a
as
question?
Sorry. As a parent, I know that kids learn more from other kids.
That's
So
what I was thinking.
I mean, I guess for me, it's kind of a call to think about the work that we're doing around how do we build capacity? How do we think about succession planning? How do we begin to think about these questions of urgency that all three, that Liz and Mila and Janie have all said to us, there's clearly an urgency in all of this. And so thinking about bridging those things from elementary to high school to then college and then into classrooms of all sorts, it seems to me are going to be really, really important.
But also in terms of broader knowledge, broader support of these traditions. And I just love the idea of the youth being, once, having been trained, not only in knowledge about their own community's traditions, but also in how to protect it, and having opportunities to share that knowledge.
Did you want to weigh in directly into this conversation?
No, just a point I was trying to make.
Okay, go ahead and then I'll go to the council.
So I just wanted to know about what's the role of land grants in this thing. We haven't talked about land grant. How does land grant come into this play about, because they are charged with extension and research and outreach and those kind of things. Where are those people?
Yes. Janie's going to give you $20 after she answers this question because this
Oh
is right.
my God.
This is right. This is right in her wheelhouse. I mean, when you think about 1862s, this is the person who's doing it. So, talk to us. Do you know anything about land grants,
Can I,
Janie?
can I say something, please? I've been on land grant campuses I was educated partially at a land grant. Not at law school, but then I came over to Arkansas. It's the 1862 for our state. But here's what I'm going to tell you. I was a national program leader within NIFA, okay, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which is where all of the land grants get all of their money. And I actually could get into the data, and I actually could see the work plans, and I could actually see the reporting on the work plans. And what I am telling you is all of the land grants have done an abysmal job of actually working with tribes, with tribal governments, with Indian people, with Indian farmers and ranchers. And this is my goal in life, is to turn this around, because this is absolutely ridiculous and it is way past the time necessary to actually step up and get this done. Because here's what I'm going to tell you. This issue makes me so angry. I can't even stand it. And I'm working with young people every single summer who literally are begging for that avenue to actually be our next food people, right? And they're not going to get that training at a private Ivy League that's on either coast that has no veterinary school, for God's sake, right? They actually need the land grants to step up. And so the other piece of this puzzle is tribal colleges that have land grant status have literally just pennies to rub together. It's ridiculous. And there is no decent partnership between 1862s and 1994 land grants. I mean, I'm on a mission because this is unacceptable and it has to be turned around. So in answer to your question, this is an area that needs some policy intervention, and it needs some people who are going to join hands and be on the same page together and make this be a different picture. Because what we're talking about are large bureaucratic institutions that get cemented into place. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And that's just not going to suffice into the future. And this is an area that is so ripe for activities and for important next generation work.
Right. Thank
But you don't want to get me started on this. You can probably tell by the edge in my voice that you just opened a can of worms.
Oh, I totally want to get you started on it. And we'll come back to it. So 1862, the Morrill Act gets passed, creating these land grant institutions. For Indigenous peoples, there are some interesting questions about where those lands came from. People often say the government, and we often say, well, where'd the lands come from that the government's giving, quote unquote, away? And then in 1994, tribal colleges then received land grants. Some of the tribal colleges received land grant status, which creates some other kinds of interesting issues. So I think, Janie, when you come in, if we can figure this out in February, this is one of the things I'm hoping that you'll say more about. And we'll continue to come back to the 1862s. ASU is obviously not a land grant institution. It's the place down south that holds that status. But we certainly have strong interest in issues related to land grant, issues and status that Janie's just kind of pointed out. Councilman, please.
I went to a conference, National Health Board conference, and one of the groups that came up was a small group from California, the Kurok tribe from California. And what they were doing was pushing, because they were a hunter-gatherer type people, but what they were doing was they're starting to get people to plant, and some of the wild strawberries are slowly moving away because of the change in climate. So they were helping people move in that direction and putting the carrots in, and then they started with the children, putting carrots in, radishes, strawberries, blackberries, and they taught them to that point to where the mothers and fathers got involved, and then they brought them in and showed them how to can and how to jar the food. And I was telling Jacob here that in the 50s, 40s and 50s, all our tribes within Arizona were canners, and everything was put in cans and jars, and so that whole concept has gone away, and so now I've been pushing my tribe for quite a while to let them know that we could be the breadbasket of Arizona, right in our area there, because of our water grants, because of our lands. There are other farmers that have been there for generations that have been farming, and we went through DDT, we went through all these type of chemicals that are put into the lands, and they're slowly bringing them back out again. But we still have that issue with Roundup, and they use Roundup very, very generously. But there are areas in Lehigh where it's all organic. I mean, it's all organic strawberries and all the vegetables and that type of thing. So we're trying to move in that direction. We did have an issue with GMOs where a gentleman was growing corn here, the 60-day corn it's called, and the group was, the farmers were planting GMO corn. What happened was this Frankenstein, ugly-looking ears of corn that really nobody wanted to eat. And hearing from our lawyer, they were saying that the farmers could actually, or Monsanto could actually sue the tribal members because they were taking that part of it and using it or eating it. So GMOs have been dropped right now. But my question is, I'm a subscriber to Mother Earth News, and I have been for, people have been calling me hippie for a long time. It's not just the hair of all Native Americans. But the thing is, they only go and look at the issues of the east forest area. And I could understand that, but there's nothing that deals with the southwest here. If you ever have a chance to try the tapri bean hummus here in Arizona, it's made with white tapri beans. It's some of the best in the valley. But tapri beans are so high in protein that a lot of our people, which is a traditional food, can't eat it because they're diabetics. So that much protein is not good for them. So you'll see a lot of older people kind of sneaking a bowl of beans sometimes, but the whole foods that are here, we were gatherers, but we also planted. I mean, we even ate cotton balls, and then, you know, the cottonwood, their little buds that come off there. But there's nothing really moving in that direction to bring all that back. Dono Autumn has this group called Toca, and they use that as traditional foods and bring it forward. And Gila River has their own Gila River farms, but there's nothing moving. There's only certain things: white beans, brown beans, maybe squash sometimes. But there's so much more. There was even a type of mushroom that grew in the Arizona desert that people could eat. So it's kind of, I can understand it. It's kind of moving back into that area there because people, we tend to move away from that. You can go into a huge room of seniors and ask how many people have eaten a wild rabbit. Maybe 5 or 6 hands will go up. So it's that generational thing to where people have moved away from it, but now they're trying to move back to it. But sometimes they think, you know, that if it don't come from the store, then, you know, I don't want to touch it. And we've been called, as sad as it is, we've been called what was it called? You know, the desert where there's no vegetables. Food desert, yeah. And you've seen, I don't know, some of you going out there to the farming little area out there, but in Salt River, but that is just a showcase. There's no plan to move it into a bigger scale as to where to feed the community. It's been there for quite a while. And I'm not promising you anything, but I'm just saying, you know, Salt River has land that they could give ASU or lease ASU. I'm saying this as one council person and of 9, but I'm pretty sure.
I'd like to talk to you about it, because my class is, part of my class is about creating or participating in farming, so, or growing, gardening and all that, so that's part of my class.
You know, Scottsdale Community College has a little small area too, but then it's, you know, 2, 3 plants. But, you know, if you look at a bigger scale, there's so much that can be done with that land, and you know, I just feel that we could become the breadbasket, as I was stating before. But I just want to thank you for all your work, and I know Jacob had talked to you at NCAI, and I missed that one, but now I kick myself, but next time. Hopefully, when you come down to Arizona, I'd like to be invited back if that's a possibility.
We will absolutely do that, and we may invite ourselves to see you in this plot of land that you've just given us.
We are also part of the Bison Coalition, and we tend to buy or get bison from that area, because we did get bison from I think it was Crow Tribe, and we kept them up in the Cape Creek, Camp Verde area. So, but so we moved them back there, and they're doing a lot better. But you know, it came to a point where our kids were saying, "Buffalo again? Buffalo burgers, buffalo, you know, spaghetti, you know, all this stuff." And if you didn't tell them about it, then they eat it. But it's the protein is really good. But we used to fish. We eat fish. You know, the fish that they were called squawfish, but they were like 6 foot long. And now you don't see them anymore. You'll see them in certain areas where they're maybe a foot, but they used to go 6 foot long, feed a whole village. But there's so much that we could move back to, you know, and it's not just the farming. Herbs also. A lot of herbs. People tell me that they live because they take this greasewood, cup in the morning, feel good, and it's just good for them. It's just a cleanse of the body, and there's so many uses for that plant. But there are a lot of herbs out there that, you know, really could be planted too.
So we've moved into, which I think is great, a conversation about indigenous knowledges in some ways, and the ways in which people have taken up in utilize these kinds of things. So, Councilman, we will certainly take you up on your offer to invite you out. And as I said, shamelessly, we'll invite ourselves out when we can get Janie and Liz here to talk to you. It sounds like Professor Vicente Carpio is making a suggestion about potentially utilizing some of your space for farming for her course as well. So all of that's certainly on the table, and we'll follow up on it. Duncan, you had a question? And we've sort of, as you all can tell, we've kind of transitioned into the discussion. I've shamelessly done it. I'm gonna, I think, probably step aside and let Chris begin to lead this.
You're doing a great job.
Because I kind of overstepped my bounds here a little bit. So let me publicly apologize to Chris that we've gone a lot over, and we've kind of led into that. But I do want to, it's really, it's a joint show. It's not my show, and so I want to make sure we do that. But Duncan, if you'll ask your question, we're going to transition out so that Chris can finish up this part before we go to our break.
Actually, what I had to say was just a quick comment to suggesting, a friendly suggestion to survey the landscape about looking at existing networks, transnational, international networks that are connecting NGOs, food sovereignty activities. And you'll actually find a lot under the umbrella of the UN and FAO. These can be friendly organizations, these can also be problematic organizations. But I think there are quite a few NGOs that would embrace this opportunity to work with you and help connect so that you're not reinventing the wheel.
Yes.
They've already got some traction, and it might save you some time and resources, given the level of urgency that we hear this needs to go forward. Via Campesina is another good example that might be good. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Well, so, yeah, we're already having the discussion. We had planned to have
Or
some-
so, or
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Janie.
well, I was asking a question. Do you need me to stay on for the next period, or?
Would love you to participate in the discussion. We know you have other things going on, so if you can stay with us, great. If not, we want to thank you for your time.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Brian, I just wanted to have one last comment, and I'll stay on and be available. But we cannot underestimate the importance of our tribal governments to actually be in these spaces. They are critical. And Councilman, I'm looking at you. But I tell you, if we don't have tribal governments stepping into these policy spaces, then we're missing a big, huge piece of the puzzle. And I can go off on that for days and days and days. But my feeling is that we need all of the above. We need NGOs, we need community groups, we need individuals, but we also need tribal governments. And on the other side of the picture of what do we eat, we need all of the above. We need our traditional foods, we need culturally appropriate foods for us, but we also need just healthy foods. And we've got to actually, I think our sense of urgency has to be around not parsing ourselves to the point where I will tell you, and I'll share in this group, the larger agricultural community has parsed and siloed itself to the point where pieces of the agriculture puzzle, if you will, can't even talk to each other. If Indian country does that, we are truly lost. We have yet to actually see the power of intertribal cooperation in these spaces. And that's what makes me get up in the morning, is what's going on with our youth, how can we empower them, but also what can we do individually within our communities, within our tribal governments, but what can we do to actually build out the intertribal cooperation that's necessary to actually really fully embed the food and agriculture infrastructure across Indian country, because quite frankly, in many areas of the country, we're going to have to do it intertribally. It can't work any other way. So, and I can go off on that forever. I'm going to stay available, but I'm going to just kind of listen with one ear and listen. And if you need me, holler. But I'm here. I'm gonna stay.
Thank
Just
you
had
so
to get
much.
that off my chest.
Thank you, thank you. Well, actually, could I ask you to respond to that point? That's a really, I think, fascinating point, because it gets to governance, it gets to, equitable participation in the food system, not only from the perspective of access to healthy foods and traditionally appropriate foods, but then also, like I was describing, financially viable farming operations. Does that depend on intertribal cooperation, and what's your view on that?
It does, but when the allotment system came in, a lot of the tribes a lot of the community members got allotment. So there are a lot of allotments where it's been down to, you can own a foot by a foot. So you have 510 people that own 1 acre, and so they are not wanting any type of change in the type of funding that they're getting from, let's say, the generational farmer. And so there are a lot of issues with land at this time, and the Cobell land buyback program actually helped out, but that, we're way off from where we can sustain areas. So there are tribal pockets of land that are not used. There was a 40-acre plot behind our canal systems where we had actually a farming, an area, cow area. I guess we had cows and they had dairy products and actually beef for the tribe, but the majority of it actually went out. And it's strange, I miss that smell every once in a while, it's just weird, because years and years I grew up with that. But we're starting to understand now that there is a lot of need for food. You can't eat money, and that's the thing that we try to push with a lot of the people, is that, if we can keep making you a little bit of money for the land that you let us use, then we'll be able to plant food to even feed our tribe. And we're thinking pretty much mostly our tribe at this time, but there are we do sell at certain stores. We'll sell the tapri beans, we'll sell the hanam, which is the choya buds, and it's actually tastes like okra. But there are other ways that we deal with the foods. It's just, we're starting right now, we're looking at a future date where we're going to start getting seeds, and we're starting to keep them and keep them for generations later on. But we do know that, we do realize it, and I've been with the council for 17 years, and I'm not bragging or anything. I don't even know how I got into this job, but the point being is that I've been trying to push this for a long time. I've seen the implications where we could do this for a lot of people, and the seniors are out there. Sad to say, a lot of them have passed on, but there are, any place you go, McDonald's, Arby's, Jack in the Box, any place, fast foods, and that's one of the things that are killing a lot of our people, is just diabetes and fast foods. No type of nutrition in them. So when I was young, I came home to cold beans and tortillas, and that was good enough for me. But that was the thing, it was there, and the type of things that were ready to eat were nutritionally okay for you. So it's a totally different area, and it's trying to move the kids back, and I think our government, they understand that, and it's just getting everybody on board, pretty much. But there are tribes, the southern tribes have gotten on, we're just talking about Action, they have a USDA government grant that they actually grow potatoes and Lay's potato chips and all these other ones that they get that. We also do with the Durham wheat, where it don't stay here, it actually goes to Italy. But there's nothing that's there that comes back. Even the potato fields, I think they pick them 3 or 4 times, and they don't ever open them up until it's too late. So it's a need. It really is a need, and I appreciate being even asked to be here, because this kind of hits home where I've been trying to push it forward. So, thank you.
Okay.
I'll direct this to the councilman, but it's open to everybody who might have experience with this. It relates to the tribal council government structure of tribal communities and the relationship they have with non-Native American agribusiness. And I'm wondering if there are ways for tribes to reclaim some of that land they are leasing to agribusiness. Reclaim that as part of the food sovereignty movement on their tribe, to change those leases, maybe phase some out, and begin to own that land and produce it in a way that they feel is culturally appropriate and economically valuable to their tribe. And I know some tribes that have had difficulty doing some of these, making these transitions because there are non-native people on the council who have agribusiness connections or interests, possibly conflict of interest. So I'm wondering if so there's two parts to that question. Is it possible to move in that direction of reclaiming some of that land that is now currently agribusiness? And is it possible to do that by perhaps working towards a more representative government of the tribe themselves, the owners of that land?
If I may,
Yes, please.
for years, we've been told, don't touch farmers' lands, because the majority of the time, you have tribal members that are in between Heel River, Akchentona, Autumn. A lot of them own land in Salt River, so they don't want you messing with their lease checks. That's the truth, that's the truth. So we've been leaving them alone, but now they've been kind of scaling back, so we have this land. We were told in our Lehigh community that you can't grow anything over there because there's rocks and sand. This company came in and they did a lot of organics. And so we realized that is a possibility. The farmers the older farmers understand now too, because they used to just plant cotton year after year after year after year, and it killed the land. You could even look at the soil and it was dead. So now they're starting to plant a lot of hay, but the reason why they're planting it regenerates the soil, but they're selling hay now for what, $20 a bale, excuse me, and it used to go for $5. So I don't know where it's all going, but they make a lot of it. So we're looking at that and we're trying to bring it back, and we're trying to make sure that people are being taken care of, and we are still gatherers. We still go out, we still get the cholla buds, we still go out hunting for deer, hunting for rabbits. People used to love jackrabbits, and I'll tell you a little story about my grandma. She would cook a pot of jackrabbit, and I remember that. And she would be stirring that pot, and here comes that head coming around like this. But she loved it. She would crack it open, suck out the brains, suck out the eyes, and chew in the ears. And I didn't see anything wrong with that. But people nowadays look at something like that, and they'll just won't stay in the room. But that's the thing. When you grow up like that, it's easy to understand where our protein came from. But we are moving in that direction, and we've been looking at this for years, and sustainability is a possibility. I've been trying to say we should just plant cholla buds or cholla cactus. That way we don't have to go out there and worry about going to different areas to look for stands of the cholla cactus rather than just going out straight. It's funny because we have a guy that is there now, and his name is Ken Singh, and he is I've known him for 17 years, and it seems like the tribe is always fighting with him for some reason or other. I don't understand why, and I keep bringing it back. But he has fish emotions. He does his own on his own stuff where he sells it to the Rose Society, all around ASU, all around Scottsdale Community College, and And yet our tribe continues to just push them aside and not work with them. You know, and that's kind of a sad thing to say, but you know, he is willing to help out, and he is someone that I've always tried to reach out to kind of put me back on that path of trying to make sure that we have something for our people there rather than going out to buy it, because you can always buy it. I mean, you can always have it there, and if it's gone in the city where the markets are at, then they'll come out to you. So it's a totally different thing when you're selling it to the outside. If you have a stand in Salt River, you can sell it to the outside. But if you go out to the outside of Salt River, and then there comes all the other things there. But it's just something that we need to move into, and I'm hoping that we really look at this. I have 5 or 6 plans over 17 years that have been given to me that the tribe has looked at, and it all comes down to one thing: no, it's not going to make money. Oh, it's not going to make money, but you're going to have a lot of food. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sorry.
It does. I know there's a lot of challenges that you face internally and externally, and you've reflected on them, so good, honest answer. It's a tough question.
I just want to throw in a couple of comments very quickly. Is what the councilman just walked through is the delicate dance that has to be undertaken, and it doesn't happen overnight. If you try to go, I've actually sat with tribes that actually tried to do these kinds of fundamental shifts, like on a dime, and they literally crater everybody's family economies, if you will. I mean, you can't drive this ship just without really thinking through all of the consequences and the timetables and the costs associated with a shift, which is, you know, what you talked about. We also have to factor in the role of Bureau of Indian Affairs and federal policy into this entire arena. But the reality is, it is a delicate dance. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's just going to require staying power and a really kind of take the rose-colored glasses off and confront the costs of these shifts, and to have a plan for addressing how we get to where we all think we want to be. And you know, it took us a long time to get into this quagmire, and it's going to take us hopefully not as long to work our way out of it. But the reality is, I'm seeing tribal governments all over the country literally investing in the strategic planning and the financial analysis and the market. You even mentioned the market issues. Those have to be kind of thought through with a clear mind about how to get from point A to point B. And then we also have to think, as a councilman, he thinks about this all the time, I'm sure, is this going to be financially standing on its own and capable of actually, you know, bearing food moving forward on its own budget? Or is this a social program that you have to go around and find resources to actually insert into it every year? So there's just a lot of balancing that has to happen, and a lot of strategic planning with a clear focus on, you know, real timetables, as well as real policy interventions that have to happen along the way, as well as financial impacts to individuals, the community, and the tribe itself. It's always easier said than done, bottom line. But it's worth doing. It's worth doing.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, I just want to, the councilman's got to leave us, so I want to just, on behalf of the President's Office on Center for Indian Education and Food Systems Transformation Initiative, I want to thank you for joining us, for opening us in a good way, for engaging us, and I promise we will follow up with you. But there's an opening that the councilman is going to run off to, so I just want to make sure before you leave, we we acknowledge your presence here and just tell you how grateful we are for you. And again, ASU recognizes, if you all don't know, there's a statement that the President released on August 31st, 2015 that acknowledges ASU's presence on the ancestral homelands of the Accomaw, O'odham, and Peepash peoples, which includes obviously Salt River, so thank you for everything. Thanks.
The one thing I wanted to say too was, if you're in the area here, just walk and look at all the rock structures. There's a petroglyph there, and if you're at a certain time of the day or a certain time of the evening, you'll see that petroglyph, and that was made for you. That was to show you that people were still here. If you go up a mountain, go early in the morning, and if you have time, come down in the late evening. Every one of those petroglyphs was totally different, and they were made to show people that people were here before, and to help them understand some of the signs that were there, and they say some of those signs were made for certain people. And you'll feel empowered by looking at them and even understanding and knowing that somebody else can go up there and not even see anything, not see anything. So I want to thank you all for inviting me here, and I'd be more than willing to come back and drag my tribe into the 21st century.
Thank you very much. Well, so here is where we're at. We have just about 5 minutes or so before we will take a 15-minute break. We'll be setting up for lunch. We're going to have a tamale bar. Is that right, Sydney? So we'll take a short break here in just a second, and when we come back, you can relax, network, enjoy the lunch, and after about a half an hour or so, we'll move into the last portion, short portion of this workshop, which will be now to take these ideas, this discussion, and hone the notions, cultivate them for ideas for special issues of these journals. But I want to take the last 5 minutes and just, we have a number of people representing communities, representing history and philosophy, sustainability, agribusiness, nutrition. We've had a couple notions of potential collaborations, either in the classroom with other universities. Have people heard of possible collaborative opportunities, places they can possibly engage? I'd love to hear from the audience what is coming out of this. Or if you have work like Josh, for example, you're beginning to focus in food systems, if you see linkages. I'd love to hear what's bubbling up for people. Any thoughts? Yeah, I know it's on you now.
Well, I was one of the people who went to Senegal, and I thought what was interesting about that was that it brought young African entrepreneurs in the food business, so it's kind of as long. So that was everything from farmers to people who, want to take things and make them, or, it was anybody in the kind of food business in Africa. And it was really fascinating because, first of all, our image often of Africa is, the gloom and doom and, whatever. And then when you're there, you meet all these, like, I don't know how many, it was like, 1,000 or maybe, I don't know, 500. There were a lot of young entrepreneurs and with great ideas. And but we brought a team of us, including people from the business school and from the International Business School, and we ran all these different workshops, partially to sort of take their ideas of what they were doing and try to like bring them to another level, or look at the challenges around them, and then with other people figure out how to make those businesses thrive. And I was thinking about, it was sort of this idea of capacity building, right? And ASU has a lot of resources, and I was just thinking about something like that around, native, tribes, or but particular people who have, who are either farmers, but they can be all the way different levels of the food business or food generally, and have some kind of the summer program, which has some kind of summit where you bring people together and have various workshops. And part of what was happening there was, somebody from Ethiopia was talking to somebody from Zambia and going, oh, I had so there was sort of the experts on various things, but then there were just that kind of cross-fertilization. It was, I mean, it was really, I thought, and our idea, which I, partly lost some people here, but was to have a kind of network where people could ongoing plug into ASU expertise and maybe think of collaborations from there. But anyway, it kind of reminded me that there might be something, not the same as what Jamie's doing in Arkansas, but more of a, and maybe it's tribal leaders or that are thinking about food, but maybe it's also farmers and it's, and different sorts of people. And, we might think about organizing something that would be a resource for them and a capacity building, but also looking towards the kind of collaborations that maybe ASU could be a help to things.
And just following up on that Senegal, one of the things that I think made that conference workshop successful was that we stepped back as faculty and let the youth take charge.
Yes.
It was a very uncomfortable, risky proposition to take up, but I think on the whole, it turned out to be very good. We generally try to say, okay, we'll have them in our class and we'll direct them out, but I found that when you let them take charge to a certain extent, it just,
so it wasn't sort of didactic, like
Yes.
we're here to help you. It was more, part of it was just having that kind of arena.
And on that opportunity part, one thing that we could do at ASU is now we have this partnership with University of New South Wales as part of a Plus Alliance. And I have visited their campus. Their campus also stands on tribal grounds, and they have a lot of engagement with their tribal communities. And there is a push from the president's level here in this partnership with the University of New South Wales. And I think there are calls for seed grants and there is some amount of money available. That, I think, could be a useful way to start because that partnership already exists and that university has a very rich set of faculty and other resources on native cultures. And perhaps that could be a way that then we then expand to other native communities.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts? Yeah, Milan.
Yeah, I'm interested in this dialogue of native food system and food sovereignty issues from the perspective of agrobiodiversity. And I really enjoyed the talk from Nyla and Jenny regarding the genetic repatriation. The reason I'm interested in that part was my work in Nepal, working with Indigenous community, and there was a genetic repatriation move, and then we were successful bringing some of the seed back. But the problem was, none of the people who were very familiar with how to grow those particular seed and particular environment. And I see the same process here in Southeast when I was a grad student and working with the community. They were starting with the same idea. They did manage to bring some of those back, but they didn't have the knowledge. But the problem was the passing down of this indigenous knowledge from the earlier generation to the new generation. And so what we were able to do was to develop a protocol. Memory banking, that means the young people will be actually asking questions with their elders about how they used to do things. And this is particularly important for the tribes with the oral tradition. And that really worked. But here, coming back to the ASU, I just don't find that platform. For me, I would like to engage in the agrobiodiversity, this particularly documenting indigenous knowledge and all of that. But the lack of a platform was what I find sort of detached from that, something that was close to my heart. And I think the conversation we are having with the councilman, and I ran to him and just wanted to talk to him about some of the things he was saying was, he knows a lot of these things were working here, but I doubted if some of those knowledge will be passing down to his new generation. And so that would be something I see as a potential partnership opportunity. Not that we'll be sort of taking the knowledge from the community, but just helping them develop the protocol and then just keep the protocol with them, whatever the way they see fit. And so that's something I would be really interested in, having background in anthropology, that's something I feel like I can contribute to this biodiversity conversation and food sovereignty conversation that we are having. So.
Great.
I think that's something that with AIS, American Indian Studies, I mean, that's sort of our focus is, in part of our paradigm, is looking at how do we develop these and with that emphasis on oral history and maintaining especially that knowledge, indigenous knowledge within the communities.
Well, one of the things I think we'll do with this workshop, we've run a couple of workshops and we try to have actionable opportunities that come out of these things. And I think the team that organized this will be reaching back out. And so the ideas that have come up, if there are natural linkages that happen regardless, we're about to have lunch, you can network and talk through some of these ideas and things come out of it. We'd love to hear about it. But we'll also come back to you with opportunities for smaller group meetings, if there are grant opportunities that might overlap with some of the ideas that came up, writing opportunities we'll discuss here, in the latter half of this. These sorts of things, we'll try to facilitate connectivity coming out of this workshop. So that'll be one of our tasks once we're done with all this. Okay. Any other thoughts on the first part of this?
Yeah, can I just plug,
Yeah,
because following on Joe, Joan and I are both environmental humanists, and so I'm from history, and she's from the philosophy side, and just plug that we're running this little research cluster through the Institute for Humanities Research, and then we might have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, I just wanted to, Janie will jump in after you're done.
Okay, it's called Food and Wellbeing in the Anthropocene, so it's a long run. Now I understand the long run, especially when you're talking with indigenous communities, takes on a totally different meaning. But from a historical perspective, looking at food and its relationship to our food policy and its relationship to well-being, definitions of well-being over decades and centuries at least. So that's one thing, and then the other one is that I've proposed an NEH grant. Well, NEH still exists for, hopefully we'll get next year funding to do a project called Spatial Storytelling for Resilient Communities, and it's specifically a community engagement project that's using a mapping technology that a lot of social scientists have used, but historians are just kind of getting used to, and I would love to use it to and bring together local communities from the AIS or other local indigenous communities to talk about community engagement, especially with relation to food. And so that's very sort of specific, ground level, place-based environmental history. And it's an environmental history, public history project, kind of crossover where we invite communities to talk about what's important spatially to them and how that can help empower future generations. It's a technology and a digital exercise, but I think it's had a lot of other kind of units and programs and communities have used it, but I'm trying to develop it here next year. So if that comes through, I'll definitely be reaching out to several of you here.
Excellent. Katie, go ahead. Can you hear us?
Ask her again when the sound's on.
Jane, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I've got another call in about 4 minutes, so I'm gonna have to leave quickly. If there's anything else you need me for, I'm happy to respond, but I'm gonna have to duck out in a second.
No problem. I think we're about to break for lunch, and so we'll probably follow up with you on other engagement opportunities, but thank you so much for participating. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
So I think now's a good time. Why don't we take a break, 15 minutes? I think lunch is still maybe getting set up, or it's actually ready to go. Once you come back, feel free to grab lunch and chit-chat, and we'll re-engage in about half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. All right? Thanks.